Hello, this is Thomas Park, and just wanted to share some thoughts I've been having. Been collecting and sometimes video recording or audio recording or even writing down some thoughts that I've had that have helped me to deal with challenges I've faced in the world, a lot of times out at work or in other situations. One of these problems involves sort of putting my mind in a certain place or mode. That is to say, if I have a task at hand, I'm at work or at home and I'm trying to do something, I have to sort of find a way to concentrate on what it is that I'm trying to do. Now, interestingly, I will say the human mind, my mind, can never be perfectly focused. There's always, if it was like a seamless loop, there'd be a little bump in it, right where the loop resets. Just something that threw me off a little bit. I seem to remember when I was younger, maybe being able to do something a little bit closer to what a perfect focus would be, but I would call it probably unnecessary and not possible. There's something not quite human about this idea of having a perfect focus. But how this relates to things, one way would be a lot of these kind of more abstract texts, academic texts, even technical writing and stuff. When causation causes these levels of logic to depend on each other within writing, it can become pretty complicated. And it's easy to get lost sometimes and to say, wait, where was this original point? What are we trying to say? For me, one of the things I've noticed is academic writing, technical writing, stuff like that can require a lot of knowledge and a lot of focus and a lot of intelligence to read. And I think the reason for that is this idea of kind of I call it an Inception layer. It really actually, that's just from the Christopher Nolan film, where these phenomena in the film, the characters would be like in a room in this one situation, and then they'd go a layer deeper, and then this deeper Inception layer would have this other plot going on, and instead of things being kind of like a spider web, it was more like almost a vertical, how deep do you go, Inception layer wise. There might be some weird reference to another layer. And I think that part of this may have been something like, say you're dreaming, and your dream has many levels or layers of awareness. The one is near the top, near your waking state. You might hear a little rain if it's raining outside in the dream. As you go deeper in Inception, maybe 5 layers down, there might be a little patter of rain. They do something like that to remind you that all of these levels are like a little ladder or series of awareness of states or subplots, each one possibly related to the other, but often in ways that are not entirely logical. It's a pretty interesting film. It's not the answer to the world, but I like thinking about this way of that consciousness can work. So in the same way, like with an academic text, I'll try to think of an example. Say there's an analysis of Hamlet, for example, the text in it. The writing starts out with some general notes about the plot, and then it gets into, say, a comparison between the different regimes, the one before the fall of Hamlet's father's rule and the one after. And then it goes a layer deeper into that, and it talks about modernity and the slow movement towards secularity and the things that were happening in England and Europe then. And then it goes a layer deeper, and it starts talking about causes for that. Pretty soon you have all these sort of layers, almost like in Inception, but a little bit less of a dream, but layers of logic or situations, baskets of thoughts that are topical. And of course, if the paper is written, as many are, all the layers sort of relate to each other. You could see that, but the layers are not the same as each other, per se. For example, the general plot of Hamlet may relate to and have connections to the movement towards secularity in Europe, and that was maybe what the paper was about. But also, we move through these other layers first. We talk about specifics in the plot that were written in Hamlet by Shakespeare, and then we go further into theory, and then we finally end up wherever we do. So you can see how someone who would write about this topic would actually touch on these different layers, and they really would have almost this sort of lattice or ladder effect, possibly, where they would relate to each other. These layers were very consciously chosen to discuss, but they are not the same exactly as each other. So, if you want to talk about something like pure logic, which is a theory, I think, as we would move through these layers of topic, one question would be: is causality still working? You know, if we say, well, we see this in Hamlet, that Hamlet says that the new regime is kind of brutal and it's not as humane and ethical as the one that his father had, which is a theory in premise, but it was Hamlet's. But then realize when we go through further down and we talk about the secularization of Europe, that really only works if we believe Hamlet's view, for example. I think it's the most popular interpretation to accept Hamlet's view because it gives a reason for Hamlet to feel the way he does, and also it helps us to identify with the character more. But if the character was actually crazy, as they say, there may be, in a work of modern fiction, probably not in Shakespeare as much, but we have the idea of the protagonist or the person who tells the story himself might not be well or herself, and might be telling things in a way that is inaccurate. I remember that, by the way, probably not in Hamlet, but I'm just pointing out the kind of things that occur. If that is a weak link in the logic, then you might end up discussing things and theories that people could contest, or they could come in from the other view and say, well, maybe so, but what if this logical link wasn't really, what if we couldn't be sure about that? These are the kind of things that I think academic people argue about and talk about all the time. But it does lend this sort of complexity to the kind of logic, and where if you're reading a paper or dissertation, it's very important to remember, oh, that was that reference again to that layer and set of ideas. Oh, here's another one to this leader here and how this kingdom or this country handled this sort of thing, here's an example from the Catholic Catholic Church in Germany. Here's, but one way to look at these sort of writings would be to sort of think about all the dependencies from one set of logic to the other, and just think about how they relate to one another. Now, I would almost, probably a well-written paper, I'm guessing, it would be either very logical or also even maybe kind of musical. I think sometimes that academia can get to that level. I remember I used to code a lot in Python, and it almost seemed like music when all the different strands would suddenly become related in a way that would work out. I was going to bring up the example too of, I think one of the movies that did this pretty well was the Joker movie, which was some criticized and some not, but there was a subplot where the Joker was made to believe that he was related to the Wayne family, Batman's family per se, and at first it seemed that we were to believe that, and that his mother had this correspondence from, I think, the elder Batman's father, the elder Bruce Wayne, a love letter written to her. But as the story continues, at the same time that the Joker's sort of mental state deteriorates and he becomes not entirely clear and lucid, I would say, and as in self-control, he loses his composure, he goes off his medication, and at the same time he visits, there's this place where this information's available downtown. He goes and looks into it, and then they say that his mother was, it was very awful and hard to watch, but that his mother was really considered a wacko and crazy and didn't tell the truth about Bruce Wayne's father. So then that whole idea is completely, thrown into mystery, and any kind of logic based on the fact that the Joker was in fact related to the Wayne family, but was somehow disowned, becomes very hazy and hard to confirm. It sounds more and more like something that the Joker's mother wanted to think, because of the way the plot opens up. But the whole thing is so interesting. It shows how the character's sanity begins to deteriorate as he goes off of his medication, and at the same time, this discovery that something that he sort of accepted was true, which has a lot to do with the identity of his mother and himself, is thrown completely into question, which again very much affects him. I won't give away what happens next, but it's not a movie for kids, I would say, really. So, different sort of purposes. Like a person could use these sort of layers of logic or connection. This depends on that on this. As the movie Inception too, you could get pretty deep if the idea was to sort of have this sort of dream effect, which is I think what Inception was after a lot, where this sort of clear awareness of the present, where we are, slowly fades into this kind of I call it almost a primordial or Freudian mist or something that is a dream state sort of thing. Is it our intention to drive or pull someone away from awareness into that sort of mystery or tenuous set of tenuous circumstances? A lot of times these dream states are sort of logic levels. They're interesting because they seem to create just sort of, how to put this? In Dungeons and Dragons, we talked about planes of existence. There's like this mini plane, sort of a little bit, there's a set of assumptions, this little world within each, and as they relate to each other, how clear does a person want to be about how these things relate to reality as we see it and others accept it? Or is the intention to deceive people, or is it simply to throw them into confusion and just be able to let go of reality? I think a lot of more like Inception movies have partly had just this idea of let someone let go of the worldly reality, and as long as someone is in leisure time, why not? I suppose yeah. I reference this a lot, but in a poem by Coleridge called Christabel, that's a poem that I was assigned to write about in college, and I wrote a paper about it that for some reason keeps coming back to me. Was a character who appears, who seems to be supernatural and kind of angelic and helpful, and then over the time, through the plot of the poem, it's revealed that character has some harmful and negative and maybe kind of vampiric effects as well. And kind of at the end, there's sort of this sense that even in a dream or a state of fantasy or musing, a person can think of ideals, but a person is still a human. So temptation, physical limitations, sin, ego, these elements of imperfection are all still present in fantasies, even if they seem pure or perfect. This seems that could only be a reflection of a divine reality, but as far as we come back to ourselves and as we relate to one another, there is always this element of sin or mortality in a human dream, which for me has been a very helpful thing to think. All of this talk and relating to levels of logic and dreaming and daydreaming, why does it matter? I guess it depends on who you are. Like I said, there might be times where you would want to make sure that you were not going too deep into these levels of assumption. It would be more and more difficult to trace a clear logical or causal link to the top. Maybe not so much a thematic one, but a causal one or a purely logical one. But is that what a person is trying to portray anyway, is often the question. I don't think people are always trying to do that. I think maybe a technical writer might be someone who would. But furthermore, is it your idea to confuse, to entertain, to distract? Well, one interesting way to do that is to have the levels in a story or work relate to each other, but to have the logic become tenuous, and maybe certain aspects could really be seen clearly in at least several ways. And I've seen some pretty convincing stuff done in this way, where I really am kind of befuddled pretty quickly and realize that I can't always determine a clear picture in reality or in a work of art and be absolutely sure I know what it is that I'm seeing and thinking of. There really are different ways of looking at almost everything in today's world. As people would say, it's a dialectical situation where most questions and I think and pursuits end up with some kind of answer or set of them on a scale of positive to negative. It's very hard to arrive at a clear conclusion, especially in things relating to people, how we perceive things, etc. So, just some thoughts on that. And I guess I'll stop here. I'm just sort of putting down some thoughts and sharing them as I think about how it is I'm beginning to see very abstract and complicated writing, academic writing, things that before I had a hard time understanding. There are other ways to look at things too that I can't cover everything right now. We're already several inception layers deep, and if we go too far, we're going to get down to the swamp where Joe Biden lived. And at that point, I'm not sure what I would do, whether I'd live there or dispose of the evil beast, or who would receive mercy further down, and I'm quite sure madness awaits. Let's not go there. But anyway, Thomas Park about inception layers and layers of logic that I come across, and some thoughts on those. Hope you have a good day.